1.5 is probably going to be one of the biggest updates we get, and the funny thing is, we haven't even seen any of it. In my last video, we talked about how 1.4 was more of a back-end UI update, and it wasn't about adding content. A lot of that groundwork was clearly made with future updates in mind. 1.4.2 was already a bigger content update than 1.4 with a huge root extension. 1.4.2 could have realistically been called 1.5 if Ollie had the time or a headline feature. But since I wrote that, Ollie has said some things that completely changed how I look at 1.5. Ollie has described 1.5 as the biggest content update British Railway will ever have, and its headline feature could be the most substantial change to British Railway's gameplay in its history. He's also said that if 1.5 goes to plan, British Railway could become far ahead of anything else, that he doesn't think any other games could reasonably catch up in a while. And that if 1.5 goes to plan part is important, because Ollie clearly isn't presenting any of this as guaranteed. And this is where things particularly get interesting. Ollie hasn't just described 1.5 as another big update. Over time, the way he's talked about it has become increasingly ambitious. Back in April, Ollie said that the headline feature plan for 1.5 could become the most substantial change to British Railway's gameplay in its history. And in July, he described 1.5 as the biggest content update British Railway will ever have. But the language has become even stronger since then. Ollie has said 1.5 changes everything, and more recently, 1.5 completely changes how the game works, and that's a pretty big progression. So what could actually be coming in 1.5? Now, we've heard Ollie talk about a feature, as far as we know, still hasn't been released. He's also said that the features he wanted to roll out as 1.5 most likely wouldn't be ready in time for 1.4.2. And there's one message that really stood out to me. Ollie said that if we pivot it to dispatching, then 1.4.2 will definitely release as 1.5. And that tells us something pretty important. Dispatching was apparently significant enough that I could justify a whole major version number. But here's where things get interesting. Ollie has said that if what I'm planning happens, then 1.5 is huge. If it doesn't, 1.5 is tiny. So assuming these messages are referring to the same plans, whatever the size, whether 1.5 is huge or tiny, could be way more important than just another normal content feature. And this is where we can get into speculation. Ollie has said that 1.5's biggest feature might also be a back-end thing again. But that would be necessary for British Railway to continue in the direction the developers want it to go, with some much bigger new things coming to change the way you play the game entirely. And that wording is actually really interesting, because if 1.5's biggest feature is actually another back-end change, then the biggest thing in the update might not even be something players notice immediately. Instead, it could basically be another piece of groundwork that lets them introduce much bigger gameplay changes afterwards. And that brings me back to dispatching. We already know Ollie has mentioned it in relation to 1.5, and he's previously explained that the 1.x version numbers are meant for major feature changes. So dispatching is definitely one possibility, but personally, I don't think we can confidently say that dispatching is the entire headline of 1.5. The way Ollie has described 1.5 is particularly saying that could completely change how the game works, and there are much bigger new things planned to change the way you play, makes you think there could be something considerably broader behind it. What exactly that is though, is where we stop looking at the evidence and start speculating. I don't think third row is the answer, especially because Ollie's literally just been joking around about that. But I don't think a new train is the answer either. And while dispatching is definitely something Ollie has talked about, I don't think that alone explains all of this. My theory is that 1.5 could involve some kind of much deeper railway operation system that actually changes what players do in British Railway. Dispatching could be a part of that, signalling could potentially become more important, and there could potentially be completely new things for players to manage or interact with that we haven't even thought about yet. I'm not saying that's what 1.5 is. We have absolutely no confirmation of that, but it would explain something that I think gets overlooked when people talk about 1.5. If the headline feature was just another train or some relatively isolated gameplay mechanic, then why would so much of the game need to be rebuilt around it? If the headline feature was just another train, then why would so much of the game need to be rebuilt around it? But if the feature is something that fundamentally changes how British Railway works, then suddenly all of that groundwork makes a lot more sense. And there's another thing that makes me think that this could be much bigger than dispatching. Back in February, Ollie said that 1.5 is planned to be the complete opposite of 1.4, because 1.4's focus was everything outside new driving gameplay. He's also said that the headline feature had planned 1.5 would make it the most substantial change to British Railways gameplay in its history. And now months later, he's saying that 1.5 changes everything, and he goes a bit further and says 1.5 completely changed how the game works. That's not really how you describe a normal content update. That's how you describe changing the way the game works. And this is why I think the dispatching theory, while possible, might actually be too small. Maybe dispatching isn't the headline feature. Maybe it's a part of it. Maybe the real feature is something much bigger than dispatching happens to fit onto. Because if you look at everything Ollie has said over the past year, that's a pretty consistent pattern. He knew what he wanted the core feature of 1.5 to be as far as back as June 2025. He said he'd already built 1.4 around it. He said that one of the features potentially coming in 1.5 had already been in development since previous summer. Another feature had apparently been in development since April or May. And now he's saying 1.5 completely changed how the game works. So I don't think we're looking at a random feature that was thought of a few months ago. Wherever this is, it seems like it's been influencing the development of British Railway for a long time. And honestly, that's what makes this so interesting. Because we could be looking at 1.4, 1.4.2 as two completely separate updates, when they could actually be a part of a much longer plan. 1.4 built the foundations, 1.4.2 brings a massive amount of content on top of those foundations, and 1.5 could be where all of that groundwork finally gets used for something that could actually change how the game is played. Again, that's my theory. I'm not saying I figured out what the feature was, because I haven't, but based on what Ollie has said himself, I think it's fair to say that 1.5 is probably much more than just adding another train with another line. And if I'm right about this being some kind of wider operational gameplay system, then it would also explain why Ollie keeps describing 1.5 in such ambitious terms. But before we get too carried away with that theory, there's something else we need to talk about. What could actually go wrong? Because according to Ollie, 1.5 could also go very wrong, and there may be another factor behind the uncertainty: Roblox itself. Earlier this month, Ollie said that parts of his work on 1.5 would be scaled back because there was little point putting huge amounts of effort into the update if Roblox could potentially have the game nuked. Now, Ollie never explicitly said that this is what he meant when he later warned about 1.5 could go very wrong. So I don't want to present that as a fact, but it does show that the developers aren't working in a predictable environment. Even if everything they've planned for 1.5 is actually possible, problems on Roblox could still affect what ends up making it into a game. And Ollie has been pretty open about the uncertainty. He said that plans might not come into fruition, that 1.5 could potentially have to be scrapped, and that the game can even end up going in a completely different direction. So this is where we need to be careful about what we're actually claiming. The argument here isn't that 1.5 is going to really revolutionize British Railway. We don't know that. I think that the more accurate way of looking at it is that the developers are planning something that could fundamentally change British Railway. But there's a very real chance that the original plan gets scaled back, delayed, changed, or even abandoned. And honestly, that's what makes 1.5 even more interesting, because we're not just waiting on another content update, we're waiting to see how much of this incredibly ambitious plan actually makes it into the game. So after looking at all of this, I think we can finally go back to the original question. What is British Railway actually building towards? Remember, 1.4 was mainly about rebuilding the foundation of the game to set up the future, which is why so much of 1.4 was built in 1.5 in mind. Then 1.4.2, we saw the payoff with the Class 1.5, the HST, huge extension, much more content focused update. But 1.5 is where it gets bigger. Now, obviously, none of this means that 1.5 is guaranteed to be exactly what Ollie is describing. We don't know exactly what will make it into the update, and we don't know how much of the current plan will actually survive development. But the important thing here isn't knowing what 1.5 is going to contain. It's the direction about that fourth row is taking British Railway in. The developers have been talking about 1.5 and the future of the game for like over a year now at least. And pretty much everything we've seen with 1.4 was done with that future in mind. So I don't think British Railway's future looks bigger because we know exactly what's coming, because we don't. It looks bigger because of what the developers themselves have been saying and building towards for over a year. 1.4 wasn't a destination, 1.4.2 isn't a destination either. They're both just stages of a much bigger rebuild of British Railway. And if even a decent amount of what Ollie has been talking about actually makes it into 1.5, then I genuinely think we could be looking at a point where British Railway starts feeling fundamentally different from the game we knew before 1.4. Anyway, that is a wrap for today's video. Let me know what you guys would want to see in 1.5. And I don't want to hear nothing about no third roll, okay? Third roll is, I doubt third roll will even come. It will be a surprise. I think it will either come 1.6 or 1.7, okay? Please do not mention third roll. Like, subscribe. Let's hit 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I'll see you in the next one.